super excited to bring you this episode today with Bill Trevillyan. Bill has got a pretty interesting background, being inspired by a high school teacher to forming an entrepreneurship club in college to multiple startups to really finding like the perfect co-founder to start his new company as he moved out to Silicon Valley. I think this episode is just chock full of just nuggets and wisdom that you can kind of take and apply to your own startup. And I'm super excited to bring you this episode with Bill Trevillyan. All right. Well, I'm excited to have a conversation with Bill today. Bill is joining us from Silicon Valley. I've been known and kind of worked on and off with Bill probably the last 6 or 7 years since he was in college. And I think he's got kind of an interesting story talking about his journey from like school minds and then talking about doing some startups, some time in China, as well as his own startup now. So I'm excited to have him on the podcast. So Bill, thanks for making the time.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Should be fun.
Yeah, well, I hope so. So let's start with college. So you went to School of Mines. I probably met you somewhere in your sophomore year. And you were a student that generally had some interest in entrepreneurship, at least from my perspective, pretty early on. And so I'm kind of curious about like, how did you get that? Did you have that before you came to college? Did you have mentors, parents, or other people that were kind of part of that? And then I think you got to the Innovation Club for Entrepreneurs relatively early, and that was kind of your tribe. Like you found some people there, and over time you had some leadership. So maybe start with college and just kind of how that journey went.
Well, first of all, great question. Like it didn't really start in college, actually. It started in high school where I basically got involved in a research project studying a bacteria, or I should say an algae that was producing hydrocarbons, and we wanted to make a biofuel. And so I built a lab in my basement. We started, I started working on this and trying to see if I could produce biofuel. And the idea was like, well, you make something that's going to help the world. And that's what entrepreneurship is at the end of the day. You try and build something that improves the world in some way, makes an impact that you can also sell. And so I don't think I knew what the word entrepreneurship was at that point, but the point is I was starting to explore like, well, let's build something, let's get it out to the world, let's help people. And so I basically spent a couple of years doing that, and then I got to college, and well, I also didn't know what entrepreneurship was still then, but I was like, hey, I'm going to get a PhD in chemistry. I'm going to go get a chemical engineering degree, and found like, well, I needed a club. I needed to join something. And another group of students on campus was starting this innovation club for entrepreneurs. And I was like, well, this is a perfect place to get involved with. Let me help found this club then. And so I started doing that with this group. And it took a long time to get a functioning group that was actually had people recurrently showing up, but we eventually got there over about a 6-month time period, and then I had my tribe at that point, and kept recruiting people. But yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty cool. And I think what was good from a campus perspective is that fed into kind of the CEO business plan competition on campus, right? So that was just basically an annual competition, but you could guys have kind of a forcing function where you had ideas, you could work them out, do the work beforehand, and then pitch in kind of that Shark Tank type of model. How many years did you do that? And did you feel like you got better over that time period?
I probably competed in that competition 3 or 4 times over the course of 5 years. And honestly, there was a handful of other business plan competitions I participated in during that time as well. And I started out very poor as a communicator, as a pitcher. And Darren Haar, a friend of both of ours, was giving me a hard time about it. He's like, yeah, you're really bad at this. Like, you sure? Like, you probably shouldn't be doing this. But then he went on, and him, as well as many other mentors like yourself, Todd, helped give feedback. And as I would fail, pitch and fail and do that over and over again, I learned how to do it properly, because it is a science at the end of the day. Yeah. And just like engineering, once you learn the formula, you can repeat it. And so, yeah.
There's two things that I always, or at least one thing I can think of that I really appreciated about you, Bill, was I think you always were looking for constructive criticism, meaning like give me some feedback, and then you always made it better. And so I always reminded by that quote of Nelson Mandela that said something like, "I never lost. I either won or I learned something." And I think that does kind of embody the way you think about it. Is, I mean, I think obviously externally people would look at that and say that it's a failure or whatever you did, but I think you took it and said, no, I'm dusting off the pant legs, I'm taking that, and I'm not gonna do that the same way, I'm gonna get better at it. And so I do think that you're a model from that perspective where, it's like it's just about learning and getting reps at it. And it is something that is a developed skill. It's not something that's either innate or not. So
Not at all.
when you think about like product and finance and sales, kind of the go-to-market stuff, like out of those, which was the easiest and which was the hardest for you to kind of figure out? Because I think engineers have some tendencies to get some things really easy because they're black and white. And then other things, I think that they're just more difficult to like figure out in these business plan competitions. So where did you kind of fit in the scale of some of those?
Honestly, I was really good at product and finance. I guess I had an intuition into numbers. I mean, as any engineer who goes into college, like we think our skill set is only engineering, but really it's quantitative reasoning
Yep.
and breaking down problems and that are like systematic issues and trying to understand them at a higher level. And so, in terms of like product, like it was kind of like natural to start thinking about like, okay, this customer has a problem, where does it stem from? Let's do a root problem analysis and then try and think of like what is the most economically efficient way to solve this.
Yep.
And then in terms of finance, like it's a lot of Excel sheets and keeping
Yeah.
track of the
You're
numbers,
like,
making sure that
yes.
yeah. It's like put together your financial model. Like that's fun. Like I'll do that
Yeah.
on a Saturday.
Yeah.
But yeah, but then the sales was honestly hard. I communicating your idea clearly to somebody and convincing them that it has merit is a very difficult skill and one that I still have to get a lot better at.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I think going back to your product piece of it, I think that early on, I think you and I had some conversations about like, I think you just have a propensity to be a product person, right? And I think part of that started with your curiosity or your like first principles of let's just start with the customer. What problem do you actually have? And then kind of extrapolate what the product's going to be. And so, I think as your time at the campus kind of continued, I think you started to hone in, and that's where your kind of sweet spot was. I think talk a little bit about Home Metrics, which I think was your last effort on campus. I mean, it really did have a feel of like a real business, and you had a team, and there was a value proposition, and some of the stuff with IoT was kind of interesting. So maybe talk a little bit about what that was, and then maybe some of the efforts were, because I think that was probably the best product you kind of put together during your time on campus.
It certainly was. Well, Homemetrics started when a good friend of mine who is a senior in college came to me. Kayla Casa is her name. She came to me and was like, "Okay, Bill, I have a business idea. I have a problem I really want to solve. Like, I just walked home and found out that my basement was flooded. Like, why in today's era with all the technology we have, why am I surprised to come home to find my basement flooded? Like, that shouldn't be a thing." And we're both chemical engineers at the time, so like, I mean, we knew how to design processes for a chemical plant to make sure that something like catastrophic doesn't occur, and that there's all these warning systems that end up making sure the damage is mitigated. And so, like, she brought up that idea to me. It was like, hey, let's start a business. And so we started down that path. And she didn't stick with the company long. She got a really nice, high-paying salary and
Yeah.
graduated. But I continued on with Home Metrics. I competed in a couple business plan competitions, won a little bit of money, and continued to refine the idea for a year until I found my co-founder Tim Ford, and he was a really good software engineer from the School of Mines. And so he was able to build out the software side of the product. I worked on the hardware side of the product and interviewed lots and lots of customers. We probably interviewed over 70 customers by the end of
Wow.
it.
Yeah, that's great.
And so we really understood the problem. We understood what a good solution was, and we ended up building it. We're still an inexperienced team, so it ended up taking longer to build out a product that we could release to the market. And in that time, Moen Plumbing had also released an identical product to ours. And so at that point, then we were like, okay, maybe we should shut this down. But it was a fantastic learning experience. And although many see that as a failure, like honestly, that was kind of what kicked off my career in startups. Truthfully, even after the entrepreneurship club, because that was the real deal. Like we were actually trying to raise money. We were actually building a product. We actually installed our product in people's homes and got to see them react to it and use it. And but although it was a failure, it was like more just a stepping stone. I've heard the statistic, and I don't know if it's an actually accurate statistic, but like it takes 8 companies or 8 failures before you get a successful company up
Wow.
and running as an entrepreneur. And I'm like, well, that's just one more check mark.
I'm getting
I'm
closer.
yeah, I'm getting closer to 8. We'll keep going. We'll keep going.
Yeah, that's good. I think another thing that was kind of unique for you is you took a semester abroad in China. And so this was an immersion program. I know I talked to you a little bit, before you'd gone, and we probably exchanged some stuff while you were there and then came home. It's not purely an entrepreneurial activity, but I do think like you got to have some guts to kind of do something like that. I mean, and certainly the economic or the political climate today in China is different than when you went. But it was interesting, and I think you had some interesting insights. So maybe talk a little bit about what a semester abroad in China looks like, where you're really supposed to be, speaking Mandarin.
Well, yeah, it was called the CET Intensive Language Immersion Program, and so to give some context, that means like I went to China not knowing a single word of Chinese, like I didn't even know how to say hello, and I got there, and then the first day they say, okay, today is the last day you're going to speak English, like congratulations, now you're going to speak Chinese for the rest of the time you're here. I'm like, okay, they're joking, right? Like they
Yep.
can't be serious, and no, they were completely serious. Like we didn't speak any English at all for the rest of the time. And so that was a massive culture shock. And uh, I I went into the experience kind of confident. I was like, oh, I'm good with handling ambiguity. But I quickly learned like that was a different experience, and honestly, it helped me grow. Didn't necessarily handle it the best at times. I ended up going to McDonald's a few nights to handle the different food
Yeah, I bet.
and get adjusted. But it's still a good experience because, well, when you expose yourself to something that's really really hard, it makes you look at yourself a little bit differently. It makes you question your values and really why you're doing what you're doing. And so as I went there and was exposed to a new culture and exposed to a lot of stress, like where I couldn't speak English, I couldn't even express that I was stressed. Like it helped me find like a new part of me, I guess I could rely on and trust.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, it's interesting. You definitely got out of your comfort zone there. You shared a story about this is during some of the Hong Kong protests and stuff, and you were talking about you told me a story about talking to your parents about that, and then your phone not working. But I don't want to steal your thunder. Tell the story because I think it's kind of interesting, and I think it's it's almost unbelievable in our culture, but yet you had that perspective there. But maybe tell the story a little bit about it and put some context around it.
yeah, I'll happily do so. Well, so to to give some more context, and I don't know if you've heard the full story, but the way it started is I went to a friend's room. So we were all staying in this like hotel hostel like dormitory, all these Americans and with their Chinese roommates who was like their mentor, and and so like I went to go visit a friend in their apartment. And it started out with a person, like I went into their room and we were talking. It started with one of the hotel staff coming and knocking on the door asking me why I'm in their room. And I was like, so you're watching us on the cameras? Like, what? What's going on? Why? And then, I mean, we got them to go away, but then eventually, like, we ended up having this conversation about like really the Tiananmen Square protests and the protests in Hong Kong. And I was asking all these questions. I was really, really curious to understand um, the political government there, the political climate. And those are questions I was probably not supposed to be asking, because immediately after my phone froze and stopped working and didn't work properly for 2-3 days there. And but then it started working properly all of a sudden. And it's not like I did anything to like trigger it. And I don't actually know if it was the Chinese government, but it was kind of just a questionable thing of going like, okay, well, this is new. And it's a real culture shock. I mean, here in the United States, we're used to freedom, and we're also used to kind of speaking about China and the Chinese people in more like, oh, okay, they're an evil country and they're the enemy of the United States, but it's also not true. Like, we say they're communists, they're actually an autocracy. We say they're evil, it's actually no, the people are great. Like, they have amazing ancient history and culture that we have a lot to learn from on them for. And but at the same time, then they have a different set of values around how they view community and family. And so what seems like a lack of freedom to us also doesn't necessarily seem like a lack of freedom to them. And they think it's normal to be listened on through for their phone and stuff. And so it was certainly a culture shock. And I take those experiences now going forward.
Did it give you a better appreciation for coming back to the States?
100%.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
We have it very good here in the U.S.
Yeah. Sometimes we take it for granted, I think.
Yeah.
So coming back from China, though, and finishing up your degree, did you know at that point in time that you were going to probably not use your chemical engineering degree? Did you know that you were going to go into this kind of startup world and this was going to be your career? I mean, I would imagine, as you get into your junior and senior years, like that stuff's pretty interesting, right? It's the stuff that you've slogged through all the other stuff to get to that. And then all of a sudden you're kind of thinking, maybe this isn't for me. And so I'm kind of curious on where did you end up having that kind of epiphany that maybe startup land and being an entrepreneur was kind of what you were going to do as a career, not just a stepping stone in college?
Great question. Yeah. So while I was in China, I was applying to the Goldwater Scholarship. It's a national known scholarship for people in science to help fund their PhD basically, and also get funding for their undergraduate education. And so I applied. I was like, okay, I'm going to go get a PhD in materials science. I'm going to go invent new materials and technologies and then try and commercialize them. But it was during that application that I realized and I kind of learned, and through that process of like talking to various mentors and evaluating different research projects that I learned, like often the scientists aren't those who get to commercialize the technology and actually get it out to the world. And I wanted to be at that point. And so I was like, well, okay, let's maybe debate not going to a PhD finally, which was a really weird thing because I had done all this work to get a PhD. And then I basically didn't throw that work down the drain, but like chose to graduate, finish out my schooling and not pursue, not use that education directly in my career.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I did the same thing, right? I didn't use my degree basically at all. And I did 3 startups right out of school and then went to Concur. And so I do think that there's kind of, and I think people underestimate the education you get from a kind of a scientific or engineering background and how it does apply. But it's not a one-to-one, right? I think it's not, I'm not using calculus in any sort of regard, which is probably a good thing. So then you kind of finish up and then you are interested in getting into the startup culture. And I think, the next thing you end up doing is working for Property Meld, which is a local prop tech, startup. They had raised some Series A. They were probably, 25, 30 employees. And you really join as kind of the first product manager, which I would think would be hard, right? Where it's like, it's a little bit of a startup chaos. and there's not like a formal methodology yet. We're defining that, and then you come in as a new grad that's trying, with an engineering background, and you're sitting between the customer and engineering, and you're trying to play that role. So maybe talk a little bit about that transition, and what went well, what didn't go well. What do you think your background kind of prepared you for?
Well, yeah, and I mean, Todd, as you know, you helped me get an internship there, and that internship, I spent basically 4 months doing customer discovery research. I was talking to customers, putting together proposals for a new product, and saying like, okay, we've done all this research. We know the customer's pain is X, and therefore let's go solve this in this way. And it was just basically a research project over 4 months. But what I learned through that process was like, okay, I had some experience from home metrics talking to customers. And so I applied that and did the same thing at Property Meld and really focused and honed the skill to the point that I could be a successful product manager because I really, really, really understood the customer. And that's what allowed me to get then hired at Property Meld and leverage that skill, even though I didn't have any of the other skills of a product manager. And so it ended up being like a great experience in the sense that like I was an expert on the customer. I was able to bring insight to the team and help them understand, okay, this is the direction we need to go, and this is why, because it's the customer's pain. At the same time, though, I was some 23-year-old that was working with people 5 to 10 years older than I am and helping give them direction, trying to inspire them to work on certain features and certain parts of the product, and basically trying to influence this team who was like, why are we listening to this kid? Like, and so it was definitely a difficult experience, and it was definitely out of my comfort zone. I was probably working 12 to 14-hour days just trying to like read books, do research, make sure my arguments were sound, and I could support everything even if people pushed back. And but overall it was an amazing experience. I mean, David and Ray at Property Mill gave me the opportunity to really grow and learn how to do the job on the job, which I wouldn't say everyone lets you do that, lets you get away with.
Yeah, I think you sell yourself a little bit short, though. I think you talked a little bit about putting yourself out there. I think, and you do allude to, you're not afraid of hard work. And I think that every stop that you've ever been, you're not afraid of putting the time in. And so when you combine a passion for the customer, hard work, and ability to continue to learn, you just kind of close that gap. And so I think there's a lot of similarities that concur, where it's like I ended up doing a bunch of different jobs that I probably wasn't qualified to do, but it's like those ingredients of like, a focus, the hard work, and then continuous like learning. And whether it's like, reading, talking to customers, whatever it happens to be, it's just like, I'm going to figure this out. I do think is some of the entrepreneurial ingredients to be successful, because you're going to hit roadblocks, you're going to have all these issues. And if you just keep following that methodology and saying, it's not about my ego, it's about the outcome, I think it does really work, well. And I think you have started to develop that pretty early in your career.
Completely. Well, I mean, and to your point, like if you focus on the customer and really focus on understanding their root pain, the pain that they don't even know how to verbally express, like it's really, really hard to go wrong at that point. Because your assumptions are going to be founded, your assumptions are going to be somewhat accurate. And so then you can go test that and validate that and turn it around and say, okay, we're mostly accurate here, and we're solving their problem, and they're happy with it. If you don't focus on the customer, then you're going to waste your time and spend resources on all these other things. And really, you can't make an impact. Even if you're a good product manager, know what you're doing, if you don't focus on the customer, like you will fail naturally. And so
you can't be based on assumptions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So then you moved from Rapid City to Silicon Valley. And so I think in some of the discussions that we had was I think you wanted to be around more entrepreneurs. You wanted to be around more people building startups and more of a culture of that. And so I'm kind of curious on, other than kind of the expense, probably sticker shock of moving out there, what were some of the elements of or the positive changes for you? I'm sure whether was it just a culture of startups, like how, a lot of smart people running around, talking about starting companies, money. There's a lot of ingredients out there that I think make that place special.
It certainly is. So, like, when I moved out there, I didn't know anybody out in the Bay Area really. I moved with a good friend, but when I got there, like, I mean, we didn't have friends out there, like, so I was like, okay, let's make some friends. So I went to a coffee shop, Blue Bottle Coffee Shop in Palo Alto, and I chose that coffee shop because that's what the internet said. It was like, oh, a lot of entrepreneurs go here. Okay, great, let's try it. You go in, and then I'm just standing in there in line, and I hear two people in front of me talking about machine learning. Two people behind me are talking about like augmented reality, and then and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I think I'm in the right place. Like, they're talking about technologies that I'm not familiar with, don't really understand, and I'm like, this is a good place to get really exposed to the opportunities out in the world. And then I go and sit down over at a table, and then the person next to me goes like, oh, hey, what's your name? And I'm like, oh, hi, I'm Bill. Like, good to meet you. Like, what do you do? And he's like, I'm working on like solving aging and making sure that we don't age. And I'm like, well, that's really cool. Like, like, I'm in disbelief a little bit, but still, like, this is a really interesting conversation that's started. And so, in combination with that, and then just all the startups and all the meetups, all the VCs in the area, there's more resources there than it can afford to use. Honestly, and so it's a place that if you go, you can be surrounded by the right people who can teach you. And as somebody who still didn't have really a good sense of all the variables involved in creating a startup, is like the perfect place for me to go like, oh, not aware of a lot of things. Like, let's quickly fill those gaps.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's a good overview. So then maybe talk a little bit about your next stop, which was Inco Technologies. Quite a bit different than Property Meld, maybe a little bit further down the maturity curve, right? They'd gotten a Series B funding. They were probably, I don't know, you probably tell me, over 200 employees when you got there. They already had, product management and maybe some infrastructure. And so you're playing more into that. Like, what was that like to go from, your own thing to like Property Meld, which is 25, 30, and working a lot of hours, probably with not a lot of structure, to going to a larger organization in a technology space?
It was honestly a really interesting experience. So you talk about like maturity of the company. So yeah, they had a lot of funding. I think they were valued at like $1.2 billion or something, which I was like, wow, it's a unicorn. What does
Right.
that even mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, then like I got in, I was the second product manager who was hired, and they didn't like the company didn't know what product management as a like a
The discipline.
discipline was. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so they didn't have any processes. And so my boss was like, okay, so we got to build a product organization. How do we do that? I'm like, well, here's some hypotheses, but I'm kind of looking for you to guidance on this. But then he was like, "No, we're a team. Let's figure this out." And so we started to build out the foundations of a product management organization there. And we found a lot of struggles because people didn't know what product was, and they were moving at an incredibly fast rate. In the short time that I was there, they hired 130 people,
Holy smokes.
and like people didn't know each other's names. It was a fully remote organization, and uh, there was a lot of problems. Like I thought I had seen some fires at Property Meld and learned to like deal with some issues, but the scale when you have a bunch of money and people are really burning it quickly, like the fires are much larger to the point that like you you question what you're doing at times, going like, are we doing this right? Like, how are we successful? I don't know. But it's still a really good learning opportunity. first going from like home metrics, where it's like, okay, let's start a company, to then property meld, where it's like, okay, how do others do this? And then to Encode, where it's like, okay, what does scaling look like? And so now I've gotten a chance to kind of see early stage 1 to 10 employees to 30 to 50 employees, and also now 200 to 300 employees who are scaling really quickly with a lot of funding. And so now I feel like I have a good sense of like what the set of problems are at each level. And I'd recommend to anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur, go follow that same path, because it really exposes you to the broad range of skills that you're going to need, and the broad range of talents that you're going to have to recruit to your team to really get a company off the ground and keep it alive.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things too, talking with entrepreneurs is like, going into the workforce and working for somebody isn't betraying your kind of goals. I think you got to kind of look at it and say, does this further my toolkit of skills, and then can I bring that back? And sometimes you just got to go, be part of it. And it's kind of funny. Like I went to Concur, and I was kind of saying I need to diversify my skill set because I want to go back and be an entrepreneur. And so what did the company do? They basically kept me busy for 20 years, moving me from job to job. And so you got to do sales, you got to do marketing, and we went from 40 employees to 12,000 in 19
Wow.
years. And we went global, and we went public, and we had a lot of those experiences, but it was always this thing where like, I've got a checklist of skills that I need to get. And if the company's still giving me them, then, this is okay. And, they came in beneficial down the road, but it was just interesting where you talk to some of them, and it's like, you can get some really good experience working for some of those companies and get some of the skill sets you're looking for that will benefit your next startup or the startup that you're going to join.
I think it's necessary. I mean, the entrepreneurial world likes to praise and put these young entrepreneurs on a pedestal who drop out of college and start a company and grow it to $1 billion. But that's really rare. Like and those people didn't do it because they knew everything and knew what to do. They got some significant funding and some really important mentors who made a lot of the decisions.
Yeah.
And but the reality is like, most likely you're not going to get that lucky. You can't rely on luck if you're really starting a company. You have to create your own luck. And so that means go work for some other companies, build out a mentorship network where you can have people in sales, marketing, product, engineering, leadership, management, that you can go to and ask difficult questions and get truthful responses back. And then later, when you do start your company, you can now go back to those same people and say, okay, hey, here's the problem we're dealing with. How do we go about solving it? You have more experience than I, and I need help. And then go from there.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Bill. I really do. I think that's it's a creative process that over time you get better, and the network is really important. Which kind of brings me next to your next stop, which is the one that you're currently on. I mean, I think you've basically left a paying gig, which I'm sure is scary, and then to do your own
Yeah.
startup. And so, you're now kind of in this AI space that we hear a ton about. It feels like a little bit of a land rush where like people are trying to use these large language models in a whole bunch of different verticals. And you are kicking off something and doing it with a partner. And so maybe start with just like picking a founder. Like, I mean, that's a pretty critical thing. And so, how do you find somebody that you are willing to go shoulder and shoulder to this? Do you look for somebody that's complementary? Do you look for, how much of this is opportunistic? Like, I think that's a pretty big one, especially when you think about a lot of the partners that have worked out, you're together for a long time and under some pressure cooker type of situations.
Well, what is the saying that whoever you start a company with is more important than whoever you're married to?
Could be.
The legal binding, the contract that you sign with them, it holds a little bit more weight in some ways.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so when I got to California, like one of the main goals I have is like, well, I need a good like I can't start a company alone. I really need to be able to build out a good co-founding team. And so I was like, okay, where do I find co-founders? And so I did some research. I asked some people. I was like, okay, how do I go about this effectively? And honestly, I didn't get good answers. No one really had an answer. other than like go out and meet people. And so I tried a bunch of things. I started volunteering for a VC for an organization called Founder World, where I'd organize meetup groups where I'd just bring various entrepreneurs and tech people together to meet each other, and cool ideas and conversations would be had. And I was hoping I'd get lucky meeting somebody there. Then I was like, okay, that's not working out great. I haven't met anyone who's a good fit yet. Maybe I'm going about this wrong. So then I like started volunteering for some other organizations like TechCrunch, Disrupt, and met some great people there as well. But it still wasn't finding my community. And I ended up getting, like, honestly, just lucky. I kept going back to the Blue Bottle coffee shop and sitting in there and meeting random people over and over again. And it honestly took 2 years of me going to that coffee shop before I basically bumped into my co-founder, where we were both sitting down next to each other. I was having a conversation with another person about leadership principles. And then he was like, well, this sounds interesting. Like, can I join the conversation? Like, I have some opinions here. And his name is Raj Bansal. And well, anyways, then we were like, oh yeah, let's talk. Let's keep having good conversations. So then we kept going a couple lunches together, got coffee at some points, then started hanging out as friends, and grew out a larger group of people where we were doing barbecues. Eventually, we decided to move in together, and that led to him pulling me out of the house and was like, hey, let's go discuss business ideas. And then after we had a couple of discussions, we were like, okay, we think we have something here. Like, we got a solid idea. Let's work on it. And then so we started working on it.
Well, that's pretty cool. I think what's cool about that is it's a process, not a decision, right? I mean, you have a decision at the end of it, but I think too many people basically make a snap decision to do it with somebody. I think you had a slow burn to find, and maybe what you had in your head was maybe some criteria. So maybe talk about that. Like, you met a lot of people. Why were they missing that Raj had?
That's a great question. So honestly, when you're looking for a co-founder, it's kind of like dating. Like, you're looking for somebody who's complementary to you, so it like has a different skill set, has maybe some similar interests, but like has their own competencies. But at the same time, then like somebody that shares the same values as you. So like, I care about technology. I care about making a positive impact in the world. I care about communication and being extremely open. And so when you're then kind of doing dates with different people, basically over a year long, you kind of get to learn what kind of character they have and like, do they match your values? There's definitely been a handful of people that I almost started companies with over the last 2 years. And then like kind of realized along the road after a couple weekends of working with them, I was like, okay, like you made some questionable decisions on your character that I can't trust you on that. Like, and it comes down to, do you feel like you can trust the person after a long enough? And at some point you do have to pull the trigger. And so even then it's still a bet, but if you've done your due diligence, gone on enough dates basically, and tried to evaluate them just like you'd evaluate a real life partner, like things are going to be better for you.
Yeah. Well, it's good. I think that more people probably should put that much rigor into kind of the cultural values that you're trying to espouse, because I think you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And so I think you were smart to do that. And I think it makes a good foundation. And I forget the statistic. Startups that are just with one founder don't nearly make it nearly as much as a team. And so I think you got to share the workload. There's just so much there. And so I think finding somebody that matches your values, is willing to work as hard as you are, that has the communication you're looking for, the same goals, I think is a huge win, but it just takes some time. And you like you said, you need to be selective.
Well, and you need to like plan for, like, I mean, it's kind of like a game of statistics. You got to go meet 200 people if you want to find the right one. If you think you're going to meet 10 people and find the right person, you're probably not, like, realistically, or at least you can choose somebody, but may not be as good a fit as it could be.
Yeah. So as I kind of alluded to, I'm not going to give much about what you're doing, but just talking about being in the AI space, it's a crowded space. There's a lot of attention. You can't you open any sort of tech news and there's other applications that we never even thought about. What do you think the key to success is going to be in differentiating yourself in it? I mean, we've talked about the customer. And so, really focusing on that, I think you're going to do that. But the question is, like, there's probably other people that are leveraging some of this technology and focusing on a business problem that's similar. How do you differentiate, and how do you think you get to success in kind of this kind of crowded market?
That's a great question. I mean, as you said, it's a gold rush right now. Like, we are in a new era at the moment. Like, knowledge in a weird way is becoming a commodity. Like, you can ask ChatGPT and these LLMs for anything. They'll give you maybe not a 100% accurate answer, but a really, really good answer still. And so we kind of see this occur, and we've been watching the fronting edge of technology and had no idea it was going to come. We were like, okay, yeah, this level of technology is still like 2 to 5 years out, and then all of a sudden it's here. And like, we were caught off guard, but then it was just like, well, this is an opportunity. There's going to be others like us, but we've prepared for the last 5 to 7 years studying entrepreneurship, trying to start companies. Like, that gives us an advantage over a lot of people, first of all. But even those that it doesn't give us an advantage over, like, then we were like, okay, so how do we succeed here? One, we got to move incredibly fast. And so let's work on this full time. We're not doing this part time. We're doing this full time. We're fully committing, working 12 hours a day or more on 7 days a week. And so that's what we're doing. And so we predict there's going to be a lot of solutions out there, but companies don't succeed because you have a good idea. They succeed because you have the right team who can execute, build a product, and sell the product. And those are the main components. And so I have a great co-founder who can build the product. I've put in the work over the last 7 years to figure out how we can sell the product and at least get help when I don't know. And so we've already have a mentor network of probably about 15 people built out that we've been going to with questions on trying to evaluate when to pivot and which direction to go, so that we can move as fast as possible. And so we're going to keep leveraging, I guess, those principles of moving fast, being customer focused, and making sure that we have the right team members on the team to really be successful in this space. We're looking for an ML co-founder right now because we realize, like, that's our weakness. And if we want to make sure that competitors don't have any chance of beating us, then let's add somebody to the team even more. But yeah, I can also speak to the idea a little bit. Like, we're trying to build an AI coach to help people improve their communication skills. It is a crowded space to some extent. There's a handful, 5 or 6 competitors who already exist. They're 2 years ahead of us. They have anywhere from 150,000 to 7 million in funding. But the way we see it is, like, yeah, they had a head start, but they also have more bureaucracy than us at the moment. And we can spend more time up front doing really good customer validation and customer discovery, form some strong opinions on what the customer needs, and then use the technologies that have recently come out in the last 8 weeks and move quicker than they can, disrupt them. We've already been able to build prototypes that are honestly functioning better and providing more analysis than their products. And so if we can build a product that's 10x better and get it out here in the next few months, like, let's do that, and let's challenge them.
Yeah, it's exciting. I got 2 more questions for you, Bill. One of them is, I kind of have this hypothesis that I think we talk about this as a seismic shift, and I agree. It's kind of like my generation, I didn't grow up on the internet because it came along when I was in college. And then you grew up where basically the internet was there all the time. And then I see my kids that basically were mobile first, right? Like, they have a different way. The internet wasn't even a thing. It was just the mobile that was the big piece for them. And I almost kind of feel like you're going to be like me, where it's like you're adopting some of this chat or some of these functions of the AI components of it, but there's probably another generation that it's integrated into everything they do. And so it's just interesting to see these kind of epoch shifts in how technology is, and then like the population, how they adopt it. And so I'm kind of curious if you agree with that. Do you feel like it's that big of a shift? Do you feel like it'll change kind of a lot of our day to day when you look, 10, 15 years down the road?
Honestly, yeah, I do think it's a massive shift. And I'm to some extent worried. I'm optimistic, but worried. With ChatGPT, you have the ability to ask it a question, get any answer that you want. Like, how does Bernoulli's principle work? It's really complex chemical engineering topic. I asked ChatGPT like how it works, explain it to a 5-year-old, and it had an incredibly good answer.
Yep.
Answer that was better than the 5 professors I asked to explain it.
Yep.
And so when we look to this younger generation, I think it's going to be weird for them because I don't even know how to put myself in their shoes. I feel old already.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. Like what I expect is they're going to have much different values. They're probably not going to value knowledge whatsoever, because they can just get knowledge easily. What I can see them valuing is emotional intelligence, communication, the critical thinking skills, and empathy, like the things that make us human, and that we are really, really good at. I think that generation will end up valuing and building technologies, building lifestyles around. I could see a large group of people going more into a lot of the art forms, going back to painting, going back to playing music and piano, uh, just because, well, like we've had our scientific revolution and AI is moving faster than humans. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Well, that's good. I mean, it's just interesting. We're at an interesting point. So I'm going to wrap this up, though, Bill. I always end this podcast with what's the kindest thing somebody's ever done for you? I think it's a reminder of just, it's about people. We don't get here alone. I mean, you and I have spent a lot of time over the years. But I do think like it's always good to kind of have that kind of remembrance of kind of something that's important to you that maybe is the kindest thing. And so I don't know if you've got a story or something you want to share.
Yeah, I do. So I had a teacher, Mr. Lovren, back in high school. He was a biology teacher for our class. And I joined his biology club sophomore year, and he saw I was ambitious and I wanted to work on things. I didn't really know where to put my energy. I would basically go to his lab and like clean out his fish tank because I was like, well, I don't know, this is cool. Like I want opportunities. I want to work on stuff. And he did something that like is changed the course of my life. He was like, you're smart, you have potential, along with other kids in this biology club, like you all should start a research project. Like, and he is like, I'll fund it. I'll give you the resources. Just come to my class whenever you want, have full access and pursue your curiosity, like go work on stuff. At times is honestly, maybe he should have, there might've been a liability there. Like we didn't know what we were doing, but the point is that we still did it. We were learning lab techniques, like how to sterilize equipment and honestly how to use microscopes and how to do research and what the research process was, what the scientific method was. And he let me work in that lab for 3 years, donated equipment. I eventually moved that lab into my basement and continued my research there, just because I needed more space. And without that opportunity and without the fact, like without him pushing me to start really, really early, I would not be where I am today, because that triggered me to get my first internship in high school. Before before college when people don't really get internships. And then in college, I was able to get an internship my freshman year. And that kind of triggered the next internship, next opportunity. And before I knew it, like my career was just a snowball spiraling faster than others. And it was because of him. He was like, okay, I'm going to help support students. And I don't actually know if he really remembers me that well. Honestly, I went back to see him and he was like, "Oh, hi! Like, did you take my class?" I'm like, "I did." Like,
well, I mean, in some cases that's good, right? Like he's doing it equally to everybody, right? He was just
yeah,
given opportunity.
he is.
Yep, and so that's pretty cool. It's a cool story, Bill. I think the role of mentors, whether they know it or not, in our lives, and there's these kind of like just inflection points and these forks in the road where people maybe give you the opportunity to do it. I think not that you sell yourself short, but I do think that the difference between being smart, being hardworking, being just a learning machine, and willing to keep trying and putting yourself out there puts you in a position to succeed. And so I think just even listening to your story today about, sitting in a coffee shop and meeting all these different people and volunteering here and doing that, you're doing the hard work to create the opportunities that you want. And so I think you said something about, luck comes to those that prepare. You didn't say that, but you said something very similar to it in this conversation. And I really agree. You have to put in the time and effort. And so I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's it's just cool to see the arc. I mean, we just talked about the last 7 years. I'm cool. It'd be really exciting to talk about what the next 7 years look like, down the road, because you've packed a lot in a relatively short period of time. And I'm excited to hear kind of how this next, startup goes and how you take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you. So thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Todd.
Yeah.